Welcome to the Warship Tactics Podcast, episode 67, Tier 8 Matchmaking. I'm your host, Maddminister. In the Warship Tactics Podcast, I discuss tactics and tips to help you improve your World of Warships gameplay. Now let's jump into the action. I will be talking about the new game mode, Arms Race, that is being tested right now, August 30th, 2018, when this episode was originally recorded. I will also provide a link to the show in the show notes to the EU community contributor Flamu YouTube video talking about this new game mode. I'll talk about that in the final thoughts section of the podcast. So, Tier 8 Matchmaker, Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Pinhead, and Chuck Norris all rolled into one. Well, you would think that's what it is, the way a lot of people talk about Tier 8 matchmaking. Well, the matchmaker in general, but specifically Tier 8. Like I said before, a lot of people seem to think that Tier 8 matchmaking is unplayable. Before I started recording this episode of the Warship Tactics Podcast, I did a quick search of the North American forums for posts about the matchmaker. The search returned 4 pages. After a quick scan of the titles, it seems most are targeting the opinion that the matchmaker is broken and needs to be fixed. I also noticed 12 focused on Tier 8. And I didn't really look at the last page. Those are the first 2.5 pages. Let me get this out of the way right now. Most of you probably already know this, though. I have no problem with the Tier 8 matchmaking. None, not at all. Does the matchmaker need some tweaks? Yes, it needs some tweaks. It does. It's not perfect. But in what matchmaker and what PvP game is perfect? The best that we get is okay or better than some, not as bad as others. Is it completely broken? No, it's nowhere near being completely broken. These are just my opinions. That's how I feel about this. I've hinted on this in other podcasts. I talk about it on the stream. I personally do not have a problem with Tier 8 matchmaking. I think what's going on with Tier 8 matchmaking is that as players are coming up through the tiers, most of them, I would say most, it's just a guess on my part, but I'm assuming that most players are bouncing around between different tech trees. And that's fine. I did the same thing. There's no problem with that. You're trying to enjoy the game. You're trying to enjoy all the flavors of ships available. One of the downsides to that, I think, is we become a jack of all trades, but a master of none. And that could hurt when the competition or the ships get more dangerous as you go up the matchmaker, getting close, the upper tiers, tier 8, 9, and 10. Some players play all battleships. Some play all cruisers, be it heavy or light cruisers. Now that's talking about gun caliber. It has really nothing to do with the armor schemes of those ships. Although historically, the smaller caliber cruisers tended to be lighter cruisers, and that's just how things worked out. And then destroyers. When I first started playing the game, I was all over the place. Thought I wanted to play cruisers, didn't quite work out for me. Dabbled in battleships a little bit, realized they're too slow for me. Finally took on destroyers, figured out the destroyers are my cup of tea. And then in that process, figured out that US Navy destroyers were my bread and butter. And I kind of specialized a little bit. And it showed in my cruiser play and battleship play. I'm not even going to talk about aircraft carriers. I think I have 2 total games in aircraft carriers, which is why I don't talk about them. But back to Tier 8 matchmaking. Actually, back to the matchmaker first. So the matchmaker is protected from Tier 1 to Tier 4. It's +1 matchmaking. So a Tier 4 ship is only going to see at the very most Tier 5 ships. And in a Tier 1, 2, and 3 bracket, new players only see other new players. They're protected from some of us who might go down and try to seal club in the lower tiers, but it only lasts so long. I'm not even sure how many games it is, and I don't think it's very many, but the matchmaker's protected down there. You're not going to be in a tier 3 ship and see tier 6 ships, and that is a good thing. The problem with that is you move up in the tiers in the game, there's not enough players to fill out the matchmaking in a timely manner. And some players say they wouldn't mind waiting an extra minute or 2 for the matchmaker to find games if it was +1 only. But I have a hard time believing that because there's some things that you just want it now. There's a lot of players that could barely wait for stuff to happen as it happens now in the game. When some games go 20 minutes, if you watch games on live streams or if you watch them on YouTube or even your own games that go a max distance or max time, you see players starting to complain about that in chat. Oh, would you hurry up and die already? Oh, would you hurry up and kill this ship? Would you hurry up? Would you hurry up? Would you hurry up? And that shows a lack of patience. So would those players really honestly be willing to wait an extra 2 minutes, a minute, maybe even 3 minutes for the matchmaker to find games at a +1 only? I don't think so. So we get the +2 matchmaker, +2 -2. But that starts at tier 5, which means the tier 5 ships can see tier 7s. And in my opinion, the tier 5 matchmaking is actually worse than it is at tier 8, because some of the tier 5 ships, about half the tier 5 ships are, are beyond hard to have decent games when they're facing tier 7s, when they're bottom tier. But we have this problem all up and down the matchmaker. But what happens is, I think this is the tier 8s really are the focus, because that's when you run into the pinnacle of the game, which is tier 10. And there's a lot of people that assume that the tier 10 ships is the end game content, which you want to race to tier 10 and only play tier 10 ships. I don't understand that. Why would you only do that? If you went up one tech tree, say battleships, say Japanese battleships, why would you play all those battleships, build all those skills in those other ships, get to the Yamato and only play the Yamato, never play nothing else? To me, that doesn't make any sense. To me, you're really not enjoying the game the way it can be enjoyed. So what happens is, what I think happens is, in my opinion anyway, from what I see, is that when people get to tier 8, they start hitting those ships where there's a big power jump. Don't get me wrong there. From tier 9 to tier 10, there's a big power jump in most of those ships right there. There's a pretty decent power jump from 8 to 9, but 9 to 10 is a big one, which makes that gap from 8 to 10 rather noticeable. The thing is most of the tier 8 tech tree ships and a lot of the tier 8 premium ships, when you understand what they're strong at, can perform very well facing tier 10 matchmaking. And think about this. People always say, oh, what am I doing in this game? I'm a tier 8 and all in a tier 10 match. Well, guarantee you there's another tier 8 ship on your other team. Maybe you should find out when and kill it first. Or what you really should do is put your tier 8 ship, when it's bottom tier, into the positions that it has strengths to deal with other higher tier ships. Because you can actually take advantage of the things that the higher tier ships may not perform very well at. There's some things that the higher tier ships have hard times doing. They don't turn as well. They accelerate slower. They stop slower. They have larger surface detection areas. Their gun blooms are crazy big when they fire their guns. There's a lot of things that are detriments to tier 10 ships if you look at them in respect to a tier 8 ship. As the tier 8 ships, because they have a shorter firing range for the most part, their gun blooms are smaller. They can drop off detection sooner. They can maneuver a little faster. They can make faster turns. They can stop sooner. They can accelerate faster. There's a lot of things that a lot of tier 8 ships do better than tier 10 ships. But then there's some things that they just can't overcome. And it's up to us, the players, to not put our tier 8 ships into those bad situations until you're just forced into it. Because it happens. Sometimes you're just going to get into a open water gunfight in a tier 8 light cruiser versus a tier 10 battleship. It actually happened to me on stream recently, and some of you saw that. I was trying to avoid it, and I finally had no choice but I got into a gunfight with a Republic in my Cleveland. And the Republic was full health before this engagement started because I was just getting cut off. I was trying to get back to my team because the ships that I was with got annihilated. And I was just trying to get back to my team, stay undetected. And then they got to the point where I'm going to get detected anyway. Let's just see what I can do before I get killed. And I got the Republic down to half health. Took half the Republic's health away before I got to the point where, okay, now the next salvo, I'm dead. And I actually lived, I think, probably 5 or 6 salvos longer, not just from the Republic. There was a Henry that was shooting at me also, that I lived a lot longer than I could. But the thing what I was doing was is people who know the Cleveland who don't hate the Cleveland. I actually have fun in the Cleveland. The Cleveland has a couple sneaky things that it's good at. When you're consistently maneuvering in Cleveland, you'd be surprised at how many times you can actually bounce some large caliber AP shells as long as you're paying attention where they're coming from and you change direction, you change course, you change speed, and just don't sail in a straight line. Don't make it easy. And that comes from its rate of fire, has really good HE, but also knowing game mechanics and putting the Cleveland. I put the Cleveland. It was in a overall bad position, but guess what? The Republic's covered in 32 millimeters of armor. My Cleveland has IFHE on it. So if you don't have IFHE in your Cleveland, you're going to struggle versus that Republic. But every time I hit everything but the belt and the main battery guns, I was doing damage. I must have set, I think, 5 or 6 fires on the Republic. And I could tell he was getting frustrated because toward the end, when I was about quarter health, I actually started shooting at other ships. Completely ignored me, and I was actually giving clean broadside, just firing because I had got it in my head. Let me just do as much damage as I can before I get killed, and I live way longer than I should have. But the point I'm trying to make there is I didn't start firing and give up my position until I absolutely was forced into doing it. And then I went in a crazy maneuvering throttle playing mode. Was that a good position for the Cleveland? Oh, no, it wasn't. It wasn't a good position for the Cleveland, but I made the most out of that situation. Now, there's some RNG involved in that. There was a few salvos that I know he probably got about 2 or 3 overpans on, but guess what? It's a battleship, tier 10 battleship, shooting at a light cruiser. The over penetration mechanic is there to help those kind of situations and ships like that. The Cleveland's not the only one that's going to get over penetrated by a tier 10 battleship. It's part of the game mechanics. The Henry that was behind me was shooting HE at me because I was moving, I had a stern onto him. But I think if we'd have put a few more AP shells into me, he could have citadeled my Cleveland straight through the tail. But I never noticed an AP salvo come at me. Now, granted, the HE was hurting a lot, but I could deal with that a little bit better. Citadel hits are going to do a lot more damage, a lot more alpha in a Citadel hit. But it's up to us, the players, that when we play tier 8 ships, that we understand what they're good at, but we also need to understand what they're not good at. We need to know what they're capable of doing versus certain types of ships, and we need to know what we just need to stay away from until we're forced into that situation and we have no choice and just have to try and make a play. Now, what I noticed when I play tier 8 ships, and my last stream was actually I played nothing but tier 8 ships, and I kept saying I wanted nothing but tier 10 matchmaking, and when I wanted only tier 10 matchmaking, I kept getting tier 8 matchmaking. It was crazy, tier 8 and tier 9. But I played a bunch of tier 8 ships that I normally don't play. Matter of fact, that Cleveland game, I didn't even have a fully trained captain in that game. I didn't have priority target wasn't working because my captain still, I think, needed like 8,500 XP to finish the training off to bring all the skills back into play. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm sorry. I'm mistaken about that. The game before that Republic game, I didn't have priority target. And the game before that was a tier 9 game. And in that game, I actually think I got into a gunfight with a couple tier 9 battleships and then just kind of used some terrain maneuvering, just how U.S. Navy cruisers do, but let the game come to me. But that goes for all the tier 8 ships. And to be honest with you, in my opinion, if you're looking at tier 8 versus tier 10 ships, people assume right away that it's the cruisers that have the hardest time. Well, I kind of don't agree with that for a couple reasons. One, the cruisers are pretty maneuverable at tier 8. Most of them move pretty good. Most of them turn pretty good. Most of them have really decent surface detection ranges. The ships that suffer the most in tier 8 versus tier 10 matchmaking are the battleships. Think about that. Except for a couple examples, which we're going to go over the tier 8 ships a little bit, do a quick overview. But except for a couple examples, the Monarch is one off the top of my head. The rest of the tier 8 battleships, their surface detection range is okay, but when it's versus tier 10 ships and the tier 8s are using a main battery, guess what? You're seen from all over the map because your gun bloom goes out to the max range of your main battery. And we're talking tier 8 battleships. The North Carolina, I believe, actually has the longest base firing range of the tier 8 battleships. So the North Carolina of all the battleships suffers the worst from surface detection gun bloom. But the North Carolina has other things going for it. But what I'm saying is a lot of ships can still perform in tier versus tier 10, tier 9s and tier 10 ships as long as we put them in the proper situations. The easiest ships to deal with tier 10 matchmaking are the destroyers. I never understand when I'm in games and I see the destroyers complaining about being in a tier 10 game. Are you kidding me? Tier 8 destroyers versus tier 10s, you should be salivating. You should be drooling, waiting to sink your claws into those big fat battleships, into those big, almost just as fat cruisers. Yeah, they got radar and whatnot like that. But if you haven't learned to deal with radar by that point, unless it's your first time being up there with the radar, you need to really build that skill anyway. And that's the best way to do it because you're going to get punished the hardest for the mistakes. And we learn better from the mistakes than we do from the stuff that we do right. But the destroyers have the easiest time in tier 10 matchmaking, speaking of the tier 8 destroyers. Because the tier 8 destroyers, there's a lot of strong, actually, except for I can think of one destroyer, I think one or two of them may have some issues versus non-tier 10 destroyers, because tier 10 destroyers are very strong. So some of the tier 8 destroyers are going to suffer pretty hard versus tier 10 destroyers. But the good thing is, guess what? You got the rest of your team to help you deal with those destroyers. And if you play the vision spotting game with them and just get in detection, get out of detection, get into detection, get out of detection, and really maintain your discipline on hitting that left mouse click and firing your guns. If you can hold your fire, you can drop in and out of detection fairly easily versus a destroyer that can get close to you in most cases. There are some examples where it doesn't work out too well, but you need to understand the destroyers you're facing and what you're in, whether you want to try to play that game or not. But tier 8 matchmaking, for me, tier 8 versus tier 10, the first thing goes through my thought is, yes, I'm going to make a lot of credits in this game because I'm going to be shooting up tier 10 ships, higher tier ships. And the tier 8s make a lot more credits and experience because of that. I try to be, when I'm in tier 10 matchmaking, tier 8 ships, at the very least, I want to be in the top 5 on my team. And it blows my mind when I end up on the top of the leaderboard a bunch of times in a tier 8 destroyer in tier 10 matchmaking. That's not too hard to do, but pull that off in a cruiser and a battleship and you know you're doing something good. Like if you end up in the top 3 on the winning team, you know you were getting busy in your tier 8 ship. And I said it in the last podcast. I say on the stream, tier 8 ships, when you're in tier 10 matchmaking, that is where you develop into a great player. If you can consistently perform well in your tier 8 ship fighting tier 9s and 10s, when you start playing tier 9 and 10 ships, you're going to be that much more dangerous. But you have to understand the game mechanics that's working in the game to put the lower tier ships in the good positions. And we're going to go over a little bit about this when I start talking about some of the ships. And a lot of people, I think what happens is, and this is just my opinion, is as soon as the team lineup pops up on the screen and they see a couple tier 10 ships and they're in tier 8, they already quit. They quit before the game even starts. I'm like, are you serious right now? I mean, anybody who watches any kind of sports, they always hear you, hey, this team looks stronger than that team on paper. But that's why you actually play the game, because it could say one thing on paper, but when you get into the game, it's a whole nother ball game because you don't know who's driving that other ship. You don't know what their build is. You don't know what's going on with them. You don't know. There's so many variables involved that it could fall together and everything line up for you where you just dominate in your tier 8 ship in tier 10 matchmaking. But guess what? You can't give up before you get into the game. Now, this is just a hypothesis of mine. This is nothing concrete. But because I've seen certain ships and I've ran into a couple of similar players here and there and a couple of clans where they start complaining about their tier 8 being in tier 10 matchmaking and they type in chat and next thing you know, the ship's AFK. I've actually noticed 3 different clans where there's players that do that. Now, I'm not going to say what the clan, this is North American server. I'm not going to say what the clan is. I'm not going to even hint at what the players are. But because it's happened enough, it's when you start recognizing and you're not taking notes or making a conscious effort to remember that, when it happens that much from those specific 3 clans, you know what? There's probably something going on there. can't prove it, but hey, you know what? It's their prerogative. They're playing the game however they see fit. If they don't want to be in a match, they dip out. Fine, that's on them. Now, if you're on that team where you lose that ship, you start out at a disadvantage, but there's even ways to take advantage of an AFK ship. Now, usually when it comes to that, it means your team's getting rolled up a little bit, but you can take advantage of an AFK ship to help you get those last little jabs in. But don't be afraid of tier 8 matchmaking. Tier 8 matchmaking I believe it's working as intended. To be honest with you, the if I could think of something to change about the matchmaker in general, it would just be that, and this is looking at one class of ships. I'm not going to talk about aircraft carriers because the rework's coming. That's going to change. We don't even know how that's going to change. A select few people know how it's going to change, but the vast majority of us don't. We could just speculate, so we don't know. So I'm not even going to consider that. But the destroyers, because I've been in some games where one team gets all of the Russian-esque destroyers and the other team gets all of the American, Japanese destroyers. That is probably the only thing I would tweak. I would kind of make sure those are mixed across a little bit. But those really good players in those Russian destroyers, they know how to deal with other destroyers who have better surface detection than they do, and they can be pretty dangerous. The destroyer thing, in my opinion, is it would have to be balanced around the common denominator, which is the average player, the exact middle average player. Because there's a lot of people say that you should balance games based on the top 5% or 10% of the game, or you should balance the game versus on the bottom end of the scale. And my personal opinion is the game should be balanced right at the middle, right at the average. That's just my opinion. I'm not a game developer, but I've played enough video games, the PvP games, and know that when games have balanced things to the high end players, it tends to hurt the lower end players. And if it's balanced toward the lower end players, well, then the mid and high tier players start not having fun with it because it gets dumbed down a little bit. I think the happy median, in my opinion, is right in the middle. But how do you determine that? That's another story, and I can't even say that's another topic for another podcast because I don't have access to that kind of information and that data that only Wargaming has to determine that. For all we know, that's how it's balanced, and we just don't see it because most of the players probably really don't say nothing. Like if you look at the total amount of players on for me, the North American server, and then look at the people in the forums who make comments, it's pretty much the same group of people that make regular comments or things. And very rare you get those little flyers here and there, but the majority of those players, they're probably not in there. If they even read it or even go in there and make comments, or maybe they just read it, look at it, go, whatever, and they go on to the next thing. So I think I wouldn't say a very small minority, but in the grand scheme of things, I think there's less players by a vast margin that are participating and commenting in the forums and there are not. But back to tier 8 matchmaking. So tier 8 matchmaking is, like I said, that's the place to hone your skills. If you're a 50% player in your tier 8 versus tier 10 games, you know what? You're probably doing pretty well because once you step into ships are a little closer in power and whatnot to those tier 9 and tier 10 ships, you should improve kind of somewhat in a linear fashion based on the improvement of your ships that you're playing and whatnot. I mean, it's roughly in that direction. It's not a hard rule, not a hard fact, but as your ship is better and you're already performing at a certain level, you should perform at a little better level versus you getting closer to the top scale, the top power ships, and this should just translate over. So if you're a very good player in tier 8 versus tier 10 ships, that's just going to carry over. So my suggestion about that is if you don't like tier 8 matchmaking, it's simple. Don't play tier 8 ships. But you're going to have a problem with that because that means you're going to have to free XP past all the tier 8 ships. Then you're going to get to tier 9 ships, and guess what? You already don't like tier 8 versus tier 10. What about tier 9 versus tier 10? Because there's some tier 9 ships that they're terrible. There's some, in my opinion, one off the top of my head right now. In my opinion, the tier 8 a Japanese battleship Amagi does better versus tier 10 battleships than the tier 9 Izumo does. And that mostly has to do with the gun layout. But in my opinion, that seems to be the case. Every time I see those two ships in a battle, when I got to deal with them, I seem to always have more problems with the Amagi than I do with the Izumo. Because I know with the Izumo, I just need to get him moving around a lot or get him to force him to point his stern at me. And guess what? you just cut off a bunch of this firepower and whatnot. And the ship is huge and whatnot. It's just easier, in my opinion, from my point of view. Dealing with the Azumo is easier than dealing with the Amagi when I'm in any ship that sees any of those in the battle tier. That's just my personal opinion. That's what I've observed with me over 5,700, 5,800 games that I have or whatnot. So, but there's a lot of those examples in there of how certain ships have certain strengths and weaknesses versus other ships. And then something else that comes into play. Some people say, "Oh, it's pay to win." Oh, first of all, World of Warships are not pay to win. I don't care what ship it is. People talk about, especially the Russian cruisers right now, the premium Russian cruisers like the Kronstadt and the Stalingrad. People say those two ships are overpowered. I've faced both of them, and I have the Kronstadt. Oh, they're very strong. Overpowered? Debatable, because if the player doesn't understand how to use them, or if they get focused properly, they're gonna go down just as fast as any other ship in the game. Like if you had 3, 4 people say, "Hey, there's a Stalingrad. Hey, okay, well let's focus fire that Stalingrad real quick with these two battleships, those two cruisers, and we'll get this destroyer to send torpedoes and force it to maneuver around, blah blah blah." It's only gonna last a couple minutes. That ship's gonna be out of the game. Guess what? Bye. A sunk ship can't fire its guns no more. It's called focus fire. And that's something that we see a lot, and that kind of getting away from the tier 8 matchmaking a little bit. But one of the things that I see a lot in the game is players don't focus fire. There'll be 3 ships shooting at 3 ships, and they're all shooting at the different ships. Every enemy ship's receiving fire. Every friendly ship's receiving fire. When in fact, only one ship on each side should be receiving fire. The 3 enemy ships should be shooting at one of your friendly ships, and all 3 of you should be shooting at one of the other enemy ships and focus them down and see who guns down who first. That's how it should work, but it doesn't really work like that. Everybody shoots at all kind of different things in certain situations. So focus firing can take care of those perceived overpowered ships. Now, there are some ships that are very, very strong in their tier versus a lot of ships, but none of them are indestructible. None of them are unsinkable. They're all the Titanic. Every ship in the game is the Titanic. What happened to Titanic? It sank. It was supposed to be unsinkable. It sank. Every ship in World of Warships is the Titanic. There's no getting around from that. So we just need to understand that. So tech tree versus premium, you know what? Except for the premiums having some credit income bonuses, some experience bonuses, you know what? There's a trade-off for each of those. The tech tree ships are available to every player. You don't have to spend a single solitary penny out of your pocket. If you want to spend a little cash, you can get the premium versions. So when we're talking tech tree, let's talk tech tree destroyers real quick. Let's list them real quick. We have the Akazuki, the Keigiro, the Z-23, the Ognivoy, the Kiev, and the Hisyang. So the Akazuki is a Daka boat. If you can't make the Akazuki work, as long as you have IFHE, if you can't make the Akazuki work, you're not going to make the tier 9 and tier 10 work. You're going to have the same problems. They're Daka boats. They want to fire, shoot, burn down the world. If you can't get that to work at tier 8, you're going to have the same problems at tier 9 and tier 10. You need to make it work. Let's talk to Keigiro. Everybody talks down Japanese torpedo boats because their torpedoes you can see them from the moon. But the Keigiro has the best surface detection rating at tier 8. Like nothing's going to outspot the Keigiro. And its torpedoes hit like freight trains. If you make contact with just one torpedo from a Keigiro, you're going to rip into any ship it touches, including the Yamato on its torpedo bolts. It's still going to do a lot of damage, and it's probably going to cause a flood. If I remember right, and don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure it has the highest chance of causing a flood of all those ships. I'm pretty sure the Keigiro is. Now Benson, U.S. Navy destroyer. Well, the Benson's the first U.S. Navy cruiser, first U.S. Navy destroyer that can stealth torp. But that's not its strength. It's a decent torpedo boat, but the Benson wants to get those guns working. It has high rate of fire, and the turrets turn super fast. You can dip, dodge, and weave and keep most of your guns on target for whatever you're shooting in nearly any maneuver you pull. And guess what? Guess what you get at the Benson also? Defensive AA fire if you want it. That's right. You get those catapult planes over you, pop DFAA, shoot it down, be done with it. You can scatter torpedo drops coming at you and torpedo bombers. Well, I should say dive bombers if somebody tries to dive bomb your aircraft carrier, and torpedo bombers. And it handles very good. The things like a sports car in the water has a lot of benefits. You got to use its strengths, though. Don't try to rush in and torpedo some tier 10 cruiser. Are you kidding me? Definitely don't rush in where you know there's a tier 10, tier 9, tier 8 radar cruiser. Don't do that. Bait the radar out of them. I talked about that before. The Z-23, German Hydro. It's a destroyer hunter. And they got super fast torpedo reloads. You can torpedoes. Just put them out there. Torpedoes. Flood an area constantly. Put torpedoes out. More torpedoes. Guess what? Those tier 9, tier 10 ships, they're not going to want to come in that area. They go, man, this is another set of torpedoes. There goes another set of torpedoes. Oh, look, another set of torpedoes. Oh, it's 30 seconds later, 6 seconds, another set of torpedoes. They're going to know it's what it is based off the team lineup and the torpedoes coming out fast. And go, man, this guy's forget that. I'm going to stay back here and try to fight at range. Use that strength. The Ognivoy. It's a gunboat. It's Russian. Guess what? It has 10-kilometer torpedoes with a very good reload. And it also has defensive AA ability if you want to do. The Kiev. It's the Kiev. It's fast with great guns. If you can't make the Kiev work versus tier 10 ships, you're going to have the same problems if you get that Khabarovsk. You're going to have the same issues if you can't make it work with the Kiev. The Kiev is the Kiev. It is a strong ship. That's a borderline overpowered ship. And it's in a tech tree. The Hisyang, deep water torpedoes. The ships get 700 meters warning. That's when those 0.7 kilometers, 700 meters, that's their surface detection range if there's no vigilance involved with the ship you're firing those torpedoes at. Only destroyers can turn, in some cruisers, only the destroyers can turn and avoid that by the time they see those. Battleships, if they're even halfway showing any kind of broadside to those torpedoes, they're going to take hits, and guess what? Those things are going to hit like a truck too, and they're going to cause floods. And it's got very good surface detection range. You got to put it in the situations that it's good with. Let's look at the premium destroyers. The Asasio. The Asasio. 5.4 kilometer surface detection range. Okay? You see this all the time. Asasios run off the edge of the maps. But guess what? They can contest caps in the beginning. They have some of the best surface detection range in the game. They're going to outspot some of the tier 9 and tier 10 destroyers. You know, and it's decently maneuverable. Decent. Not too bad. But those deep water torpedoes are murder to battleships. Use that strength. Don't put it in bad situations. High school fleet, the Harakazi. It's a K-Giro. We already went over the K-Giro. And it's got gun options. And its gunboat version is super strong. And it still has good torpedoes. And guess what? It's got the same surface detection range as a K-Giro, which is best in tier 8. The Kid. Use it to spot. Use it as a gunboat later. Forget it has torpedoes. Just put them in the water, but don't try to set up too many torpedo runs. Don't try to go hunting cruisers and battleships with it, because you're not going to assassinate any battleships with those torpedoes in a Kid. But it can spot, and it handles. It's a U.S. Navy destroyer. It handles good. It's got good surface detection range. Use it. Put it in those locations. The Loyang. It's a Benson with Hydro. We already went over the Benson. The Loyang is probably, of all the destroyers at tier 8, the Loyang is probably the strongest one of the group. And speaking of the Kid, we're talking the premium destroyer. The Kid's probably is the weakest one of all those destroyers, including the tech tree destroyers. But they can all work, but you got to understand how to use them. So let's talk about the cruisers real quick. Let's start out with Mogami. Do I need to say anything more? Mogami Mami. 15 155 millimeter main battery rifles. It's a fire starter. That's all there is to it. 10-kilometer torpedoes. 15 155 millimeter main battery rifles. The Mogami Mami is a fire starter. If you can't make the Mogami work, whatever issues you're having in the Mogami, you're going to have them in the Ibuki. You're going to have them in the Zao. Baltimore. U.S. Navy 203 millimeter main battery. Best normalization angles in the game. Heavy AP. It's going to punch through ships, battleships, at angles that other ships can only dream about. Other cruisers can only dream about. And has a very strong anti-aircraft suite. And you get radar. The Cleveland. I love the Cleveland. Cleveland's a light cruiser. People hate light cruisers. It's got short main battery range. 152 millimeter main battery, but it's got high rate of fire. Put IFHE on that, park it behind an island, and burn the world down. You got to understand, though, you can't open water fight with that ship, and don't put it in those situations. Also, again, U.S. Navy cruiser. Strong anti-aircraft suite. Defensive AA. You got to use it. If you're not in a battle with the CV, shoot down every catapult plane you come across. Chapayev. Man, can we talk about another fire starter? Excellent guns, high muzzle velocity, easy to hit targets at max range, and that's what you want to do in the Chappie. Keep your targets at max range. For some reason, you get into a fight with a tier 10 battleship, be it a Yamato, whatever it is, Keep it at your max main battery range, and just keep maneuvering, keep dancing, play with the throttle, use that firepower the way it's meant to be used. The Edinburgh, in my opinion, of all the tier 8 cruisers, the Edinburgh is the one that has the hardest time in versus tier 10 matchmaking because of, only AP. Although you can make it work. The Edinburgh is not a bad ship, but you get smoke, you get hydro, you get that enhanced Royal Navy repair party that repairs even more damage to your ship than everybody else does, and they get great maneuverability. It accelerates in turns. So if you got to turn hard, hit the gas, and you're not going to bleed speed like all the other cruisers do. Just got to put it in proper positions. The Charles Martel. Are we talking another drag racer here? It's got engine boost. And Charles Martel's got sneaky good armor too. It's weird. You get the Charles Martel dancing around and angling this armor. I've shot at those before with my Republic and with my a couple battleships, and I'm like, how is this thing bouncing stuff off its belt armor at this crazy angle? But it's because it changes direction so fast, and its armor scheme is pretty decent considering. So of all the let's go to the premium cruisers. The Atago. It's the Atago. If you don't know the Atago, I don't know to tell you. Atago's got a heel. It's got good torpedo arcs, considering it's a Japanese cruiser. Very good surface detection range. It's fast, and the Atago is probably the only tier 8 cruiser that can legitimately lone wolf in games, even versus tier 10 ships. The Atago is that strong. The Atago used to be a lot stronger than it is now, but it's got power crept a little bit. But the Atago is still a strong ship. Can't make the Atago work? I don't know what to tell you, because the Atago is strong. The Atago is stronger than the Mogami. Actually, I would take the Atago over the Ibuki also. Prince Eugen. It's a hipper. That's all it is. It's just a hipper. Mikhail Kutuzov. Okay, first of all, I still have the Kutuzov. If one of you listening to this podcast happens to be a player who sold the Kutuzov because of the smoke firing changes, I'm sorry, but I have to laugh right now because that was a mistake. That was a mistake, and you probably all know it by now. The Kutuzov has the longest range main battery guns of all the tier 8 cruisers. It has excellent anti-aircraft abilities. High muzzle velocity guns make it pretty easy to hit targets at that max battery range. And when I first got the Kutuzov, I was never a smoke firing person, even in destroyers, and I didn't play that way, and I only relied on the smoke for situation where I had to get out of trouble. I never used the smoke to pop it, sit in it, and daka. I never played it that way. I played it as a stay mobile, stay full speed, and just maneuver type shit. And I've always type ship, and I've always done pretty good in the Kutuzov because of that. So of all of the tier 8 cruisers, I skipped over the Hipper and the tech tree. So German AP, German armor piercing, and it has the fastest turret traverse of all the tier 8 cruisers. Guess what? Turtleback armor. Again, it could bounce some crazy stuff, and it can protect itself versus some crazy shots even from battleships. Not all the time, but it's going to do it a lot of the time. So of all the tier 8 cruisers, there's a lot of good choices. Mogami, Chappie, Atago, Kutuzov. You can make those all perform. The only one I think that's really the hardest one, in my opinion, the Edinburgh. I mean, the Cleveland can even do good, but people swerving down that Cleveland is terrible now, but they just really don't understand that Cleveland know how to play it. Now let's get into the battleships. Tech tree battleships. The Amagi has 410 millimeter main battery. It has the best main battery broadside by weight at tier 8. And it's an accurate battleship. And you can delete tier 10 ships with the Amagi. And like I said earlier, arguably the Amagi is better versus tier 10 battleships than the Azumo is at tier 9. I mean, there's probably a lot of people that would agree with that. North Carolina, of the tech tree battleships, probably the best one in the bunch overall. Very good when angled. You can battle tank in North Carolina. It has the best range of all the tier 8 battleships. And it has the same shells as the Iowa and the Montana, and it's a U.S. Navy battleship, so guess what? It's got a strong anti-aircraft suite. Bismarck, turtleback armor. Do I need to say anything more about that? Secondary battery. Do I need to say anything more about that? If you don't understand those two aspects of a German battleship, then maybe you just haven't played them. But the Bismarck can more than hold its own versus tier 10 battleships, especially because it wants to get close. And it has a fast main battery reload time. Get German hydro. and it's dangerous at close range versus tier 9 and tier 10 ships. Just stay away from torpedo ships. The Monarch has a fast main battery reload. It's got good belt armor too. A lot of people don't realize the Monarch has really good belt armor. You keep yourself angled versus AP, especially other battleships, you're gonna bounce a lot of that stuff. And it has a very it has the best concealment of the tier 8 battleships. I mean, you can sneak around in a Monarch and also pop up, oh wow, pow, and you get first salvo off, unless you're one of the people that always loads HE. But if you happen to have AP load and you catch something broadside, you're gonna delete it. And more players need to use AP in Royal Navy battleships because it performs very well. The Richelieu, high main battery penetration values. Some of the best of all the tier 8 battleships, if not the best. Has very good main battery range and engine boost, the speed, and it's got good maneuverability. It can get you out of trouble almost as fast as it got you in trouble. And of the tech tree battleships, probably the North Carolina is probably the top dog, and the Monarch is the one that's going to suffer the worst first tier 10 matchmaking. Let's talk about the premium battleships. The Key, it's an Amagi. It has the same main battery as the Amagi, and you get torpedoes, 3 on each side. Whoa! And it's got very good long range AA. The medium short range, but the long range, it kicks in and starts chewing planes up pretty quick. Alabama, best torpedo protection of the tier 8 battleships. And it has the same main battery shells as the Iowa and the Montana. And its citadel is completely underwater, making it very hard to hit. And it has U.S. Navy battleship, has excellent anti-aircraft protection. The Massachusetts, very good long-range secondary battery when the captain's set up right and you set the ship up that way. And it also has the same main battery shells as the Iowa and the Montana. Has very good torpedo protection, not as good as the Alabama, but pretty good, and very good concealment for a battleship at its tier. The Tirpitz, my personal favorite. Torpedoes, torpedoes, torpedoes. German hydro, excellent secondary battery when set up properly. Turtleback armor, it's pretty nimble. It's got a fast turret traverse speed for battleship and a fast reload time on its main battery, and it has torpedoes, torpedoes, torpedoes. The Tirpitz is a battleship assassin. It doesn't care what tier battleship you're in. You let the Tirpitz get into you with its torpedoes ready to go, and you're going to have a bad day, period. Gascon. It's got a fast main battery reload. It has a Sigma of 1.9, very accurate ship. High speed, you got access to engine boost, very good secondary battery, and it has a fast cooldown on its repair party consumable. It's going to come up quicker, allowing you to put out fires sooner if you need to. Roma. Roma has high penetration AP that can punch through most battleship armor at long range. A lot of people don't realize that. Not as good as Republic, past 18 kilometers. All that doesn't shoot that far, but it has very good penetration versus battleship armor at long range. And it's got very good concealment. So the premium battleships, the ones that are probably the weakest versus tier 10 matchmaking, are the Gascon and the Roma. The Tirpitz, the Tirpitz is a cheater ship. People used to call it the Derpitz when it first came out because it was a premium ship that anybody could buy, and people were buying it who were new to the game, didn't understand how to play it. But the players who know how to play the Tirpitz is a battleship assassin. The Tirpitz is just an assassin, period. And it doesn't care what tier you are. So talking about all those ships, of all the ones we talked about, the ones that had the roughest time in tier 8, tier 10 matchmaking, in my opinion, are the Kid, the Edinburgh, the Monarch, Gascon, and Roma. The rest of them can hold their own as long as you put them in the proper situations and don't overextend, don't do nothing, tactically crazy, and just let the game come to you. Let it come to you. Let it develop in front of you. Support your enemy until it's time to move in and use the strength of your ship. So when we're talking tier 8 matchmaking, take advantage of it and just hone your skills at tier 8. If it frustrates you, go play a different tier, then come back to it and play it again. You can, once you become an excellent tier 8 player versus tier 10 matchmaking, you're going to end up being one of those super Unicum players, one of those Unicum players, and you're going to come back and tell the rest of us how to play. That's pretty much how that's going to happen. So when you're in tier 8 matchmaking, you know what? Go out there and have fun with it. Have a blast with it and just go cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching every time you hit left mouse click. But if it's too much to remember, like I always say, don't turn it into a job. It's a video game meant for entertainment. Keep it entertainment. And as soon as it becomes non-entertaining, go do something else. Come back to it later. And just when you play World of Warships, play it to have fun. Don't play it as a game, as a job, I should say, because it is a game. Now, try to take some of the stuff I talked about. Even I need to go out and listen to myself and go out and learn to become that better player in a tier 8 ship versus tier 10 matchmaking. Have fun with it. Come and join the World of Warships North American Community Discord. The Discord server is created for the North American community to come together and help each other grow as a community and to become better players. You can find a link to the North American Discord server in the show notes. It's at the top of the main page of the Warship Tactics website. A few final thoughts. Patch 0.7.9 is on the test server and a new game mode has been introduced. It's called Arms Race. The EU community contributor Flamu posted a YouTube video about this new mode. I'll have a link in the show notes and in the description of the YouTube video of this, and it looks fun. I'll not go into details. The video presents this new content very well. I will say it's a version of King of the Hill with random capture points that give buffs to ships who capture them or in certain proximity when they are capped. The buffs currently are a rate of fire buff, a concealment buff, and a healing buff, and they all stack up to 3 times. Flamu talks about the good points and the things that need some changes or tweaks. It's a game mode, not a map of this recording of this episode. You have to choose if you want to play this or not. It's not a random map that just pops into and you got to play that like Epicenter. Again, it's just on the test server and may or may not make it into the live game. We just don't know. But seeing the new content being tested by Wargaming is a good sign in my opinion. I hope something good comes out of this testing. Again, there'll be a link in the description, and I'll put the video will be about what right here. There'll be a little card right here eventually. I'm considering a question and answer live stream on Facebook. The main purpose of this is to build community with all of you, the listeners. My question is, what would be a good day and time? Because of the global reach of the show, I'm willing to schedule times that best fit the North American, EU, and Asia servers. I've pinned a post on the Maddminister Gaming Facebook page for all of you to leave suggestions. I hope to see as many as I can. Last thing, torpedoes in the water are nobody's friend. Unless they're deep water torpedoes. In that case, destroyers, you know the drill. You're safe. I'm your host, Maddminister, and you've been listening to the Warship Tactics Podcast, where I try to help you improve your World of Warships gameplay. Visit warshiptactics.com to subscribe for new episodes on Mondays. Thank you for listening.